guys, what's up? It's Rebecca Main here. Hello. Here to talk to you about the technically third chapter in writing the Breakout Novel. But I'm going to call it chapter 2 since the first chapter felt like an introduction, and the second chapter really felt like the first. Anyway, chapter 2 is all about the stakes. Not vampire stakes. I know that is immediately where your head went. It's not it. It's also not the steaks that you eat, even though saying that kind of makes me hungry. I personally love steaks, both the food and the things you kill vampires with, and as plot devices. Yes, who would have guessed? I fucking love writing steaks for my characters to just butt into, and they have to figure it out, and I might go a little bit too far with it sometimes. And when my husband reads my work, sometimes he says, hey, do you think this went a little bit far? And in my heart of hearts, I say, it's not even a question, of course not. And then in my reader head, I think, maybe I should take a step back, because while I love when there's like really thick tension in a book because of the stakes, because you don't know what your character is going to do and you feel for them, and sometimes it just feels like so much that you have to put your book aside and like give yourself a break instead of flipping page after page because you desperately want to find out. When I hit that kind of stakes, those high stakes, I put the book away. And there are very, very few books where I read. But I think it's that second option of read that is the best. Don't you? Maybe? Kind of? A little bit? Anyway, Maass goes into two very specific points about the stakes in writing the Breakout Novel, both public and private. So, just before we dive right into public and personal stakes, there has to be one thing said that really struck me in this chapter. I have so many little tabbies and underlines for this chapter. It's kind of ridiculous. But one key component for creating stakes that matter and like really ground you in the story is making sure that your main character, the person you're rooting for, is somebody worth rooting for, somebody that you will connect with. And you need to be able to find that way to create high human worth. I guess that's not something I, as a writer, ever really took into consideration, but he makes some good points. Allow me to share. That last one was a bit much, I agree. For anyone's life to be worth saving in fiction, it's there. In fiction is in parentheses. It needs added value. And in the scale of values, nothing is more compelling than high principles and codes of personal conduct. We admire principled people. We try to emulate them. They are the model citizens without which our society would not be civilized. And that's a pretty bold statement. I don't hate it, but when I first read that, I don't know, there was just some part of me that rebelled, that thought that cannot be the only two things that really give a person high value to make them worth saving. Except every time I went back into a character I created and thought about these nuances about their personality and their backstories, why they did the things that they did, I realized that maybe I wasn't creating these people with high principles, not all of them, but I was giving them these really deep-seated codes of personal conduct. So maybe Maass was right, possibly. Anyway, it goes on. Honesty, integrity, loyalty, kindness, bravery, respect, trust, and love of one's fellow men are all measures of high human worth. They are also the keys to making life and death stakes count, or any lesser stakes for that matter. He goes on to say, before going into breaking down public and private stakes, about how these components, when put, let's fly at my coffee, very rude. He goes to say that having those components creates this gripping internal conflict when our main character comes up against the villain or just the villain, or that opposing force, that when they have to not just come to terms with them and get into that conflict, there's also that inner conflict of, will they stick to their principles or won't they? That is the most gripping, and it is when our main character chooses those personal codes of conduct that they've got us. We're on their side, they've stuck to their code. But I think it is equally as endearing and compelling when a character breaks their personal code, because why? What is that one thing that would make them break from it? What is that one cause? Was it worth it? Ooh. I like where this thought process is going. But let's continue on and get into the public stakes. So, public stakes. This one is going to seem pretty obvious. We've got, the fate of the world hangs in the balance. Society will fall, looming some interstellar invasion if something isn't done, or a serial killer is on the prowl of Chicago, and you don't know when he will strike next. That kind of thing, I really took up a running pose, so if there is a serial killer, I am obviously going to run out the door. As Maass did in his previous chapter, he really relies heavily on breaking down these points of public and personal stakes with real-life examples in literature. And I'm really digging it. It's so nice for me because that's a way I learn better. I like seeing something in action. So let's find out where he did it. We've got Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris as the example for public stakes. But Maass does a really good job of also weaving in the small portions of when the personal stakes get woven into this story as well, that made it such a good example, you guys. So first, let's just break down the public stakes of Silence of the Lambs. We've got a serial killer on the loose in the city, which might not really set it apart from any other sort of thriller. But then you add to the fact that this particular serial killer likes to skin his victims and save parts of them. Ooh. He goes nationwide on his killing spree, and then he has the audacity to kidnap a senator's daughter. So there are these beautiful stepping stone kind of, I don't know what I'm calling it. It is beautiful. It's beautiful stepping stone layers of these public stakes being raised. Maybe beautiful isn't the right word, or maybe it is to describe the literary genius of it all. But then you have these points of personal stakes that make this story so intriguing. We get Clarice Sterling, who is kind of this naive young investigator, psychiatrist who... Is she a psychiatrist? I guess she's more of just an investigator, but she's that young ingenue investigator who has her own, like, deep personal trauma, and she is the one speaking to Hannibal Lecter, who the police have decided, the FBI have decided, is the only person who has the insight to understand where Buffalo Bill, the serial killer of Silence of the Lambs, could possibly be. Except Hannibal Lecter is a cannibal and a sociopath and is in jail. And he definitely plays those mind games with Clarice and, like, brings out these repressed feelings she has from this past trauma. But one point in the book, we get a little sympathy for Hannibal Lecter. And I'm going to read that once I get to that page. I don't know, when I got to that moment, it really kind of struck me in a way that I just had to kind of lean back and be like, oh, wow, bravo, like, just really smart writing. So I shall read it for you. I want something Crawford can give me, and I want to trade him for it. But he won't come to see me. He won't ask for my help with Buffalo Bill, even though he knows it means more young women will die. I can't believe that, Dr. Lecter. I only want something very simple, and he could get it. Lecter turned up the rheostat slowly in his cell. His books and drawings were gone. His toilet seat was gone. Chilton had stripped the cell to punish him for Miggs. I've been in this room 8 years, Clarice. I know that they will never, ever let me out while I'm alive. What I want is a view. I want a window where I can see a tree, or even water. And that's the moment. And Maass goes on to say, for a moment, just a moment, Harris gives us a window into the private hell of the infamous Lecter. His simple desire for a view. Although, it turns out later that his desire is more ambitious. But it tweaks our sympathy for the monster in the tower. Lecter's personal stakes rise, and thus, so do the novel's stakes overall. Maass goes into the importance of weaving this web of personal stakes and public stakes being intertwined, because when you can do it well, when you can kind of have this 1-2 punch knockout scenario where you just feel for your characters, you feel for this story, like you're in it. You can do that if you pay attention to the way you plot and plan your stakes in your book. And he gives this tip right at the very end. Made me giggle when I first read it. And I remember reading it because I was at my co-work space, which is now closed due to a stupid virus. This is not the page either. I marked it, and I came home so I could tell my husband, and he looked at me like, you are really weird. But I'm not weird, I'm just a writer. Escalating the stakes. If you're ever wondering how to do it, this is the question. These are the questions to ask yourself. Who is the one ally your protagonist cannot afford to lose? Kill the character. What is your protagonist's greatest physical asset? Take it away. What is the one article of faith that for your protagonist is sacred? undermine it. How much time does your protagonist have to solve his main problem? Shorten it. Push your characters to the edge, and you will pull your readers close. In short, escalate the stakes and bring them home with a practical demonstration of how they might hurt, and you will add dimension to your novel that will lift it above the crowd. I freaking loved this chapter on stakes. I'm not kidding when I say I put so many little tabs around this, and I've just marked it up with pen and pencil. You cannot see my pencil marks, but my pencil marks are there. And I have a lot of notes in here for future stories on how to slowly nudge and do bigger pushes on my characters' personal stakes that force them to interact with the public stakes even when they don't want to. And it makes me excited to write. This chapter made me so excited to write, and it might be like my favorite chapter of the book. It's probably my favorite chapter of the book. And I would spend more time talking about it, but I really feel like it just pointed out things I already knew, but in such a way that it left me feeling like so refreshed and inspired. We all understand what public stakes are and what these private stakes are. And we can all imagine ways to compromise them, but I think the trick behind doing stakes and doing them well is just to put thought behind them. Because when we think about them, we can write them down, we can take a step back and then look and see what are ways we can just twist it further. What are those personal touches and spins we can put on it? Then the stakes get more personal for us as the reader. And that's always a fun read. That's it from me. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope if you are an aspiring writer, or if you're already a writer, that you buy this book. It's so wonderful. And, give a thumbs up if you like the video. Hit the subscribe button, that little bell, and then you'll know whenever I have a new video. And we'll just be friends from afar. Bye, you guys. Thank you for tuning in.